You know that feeling when you finally crash into bed just hoping for like a solid 8 hours?
Yeah, that uninterrupted block we all aim for.
Exactly. But has it always been like that for humans? I mean, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because in this deep dive, we found some, well, pretty surprising stuff from history that suggests our nights used to look really different.
That's right. And for you, the learner, we've pulled together some fascinating material. We're looking at a master's thesis about the ancient Roman family,
Okay.
and also articles from BBC Bitesize and medievalist.net that really dig into historical sleep patterns. Plus, there's an interview about nightlife in the Ottoman Empire, too.
Right. Quite a mix. So our mission here is basically to give you the quick and dirty on how sleep has changed over time.
Yeah, paint a picture of what our ancestors' nights were actually like.
We're aiming for those aha moments, without totally drowning you in historical detail. Ready?
Let's do it. How about we start in ancient Rome? We can draw a bit from that master's thesis.
Okay. Roman.
Now, the thesis itself is mostly about Roman family life.
Yeah.
The head of the household, marriage stuff, daily routines.
That sort of thing.
Exactly. But it gives us a really crucial backdrop for thinking about when people might actually have slept.
Ah, right. The thesis mentions the Sana, the evening meal. That sounds like a big family thing. Probably went on for a while as it got dark.
For sure.
Yeah.
And here's the really interesting part. Lighting. The Romans just didn't have the kind of bright artificial light we do.
No flicking the switch then.
Nope. Their nights were properly dark, governed by natural darkness.
Which makes you think.
Precisely. That limited light is key. It strongly points towards the possibility of biphasic sleep.
Biphasic, meaning sleeping in two parts.
Exactly. Sleeping in two chunks with some time awake in the middle. Now, the thesis doesn't go deep into sleep details itself, but those long, dark nights. They would have created the perfect conditions for a different sleep rhythm than our solid block.
So people probably went to bed pretty early then, when the sun went down.
Seems likely activity would naturally wind down. The thesis mentions the Singpire, maybe some games, or perhaps a visit to the bathhouses.
Which were social hubs, yeah, not just for getting clean.
Right. But after all that, once real darkness fell, yeah, an early bedtime makes sense.
Okay, so this biphasic sleep idea, let's zoom in on that. The BBC and medievalists.net articles really focus on it, right?
They do. They highlight the work of a historian, Roger Eckhart. He's the one who really theorized this whole first sleep and second sleep pattern.
And there's actual evidence.
Oh, yeah. The BBC mentions Homer's Odyssey. We're talking 8th century BC, referring to a first sleep. That's ancient.
Wow, okay.
And medievalist.net adds that there are tons of references in writings from like the 15th to 17th centuries, diaries, letters, even court documents.
So it wasn't just a fluke mention. It sounds like it was just normal.
It really seemed to be the norm. Picture it.
Mhm.
17th century England, maybe. You go to bed around 9 or 11 p.m.
Pretty standard.
Then you wake up after a few hours, maybe for an hour or two right in the middle of the night, and then you go back for your second sleep until morning. That's what the BBC describes. So different from our ideal.
Totally different. What on earth did people do during that time awake? Stare at the ceiling.
Huh. Not usually. Prayer was actually really common. There were specific prayers, matins, meant for those hours.
Oh.
People also read if they had candlelight. They might even visit neighbors. Can you imagine a midnight chat like that now?
That's kind of wild, popping over for a chat at 1 a.m.
And get this, medievalists.net mentions a French doctor, Laurent Jobert, who apparently suggested it was the best time for married couples to, well, be intimate.
No way.
Yeah, he supposedly said they'd do it better and have more enjoyment. A bit specific.
Okay, that is a surprising detail, but this wasn't just an English thing, was it? Or even just European?
Not at all. Both the BBC and medievalists.net point to evidence from all over. Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia, the Middle East.
Really? That widespread?
Seems so. Medievalists.net mentions a 16th century French priest in Brazil who noticed the local people waking after their first sleep to eat. And there are early 19th century accounts from Muscat in the Middle East describing people going to bed early for a first sleep.
Wow, so this really was the human standard for ages, but there's always a but, isn't there? Medievalist.net mentioned a counterargument from Niall Boyce.
Right. Boyce offers a slightly different take. He wonders if first and second sleep always meant a long period of being fully awake.
Okay, so what does he think it meant?
He suggests it could sometimes just refer to different phases of the same sleep block, maybe deeper sleep before midnight, then lighter sleep after. or perhaps very short wake-ups, not the hour or two Eckhart describes.
Hmm.
He apparently found references in old German texts where first sleep just seemed to mean that initial deep sleep without necessarily implying a big break, except maybe for monks getting up for prayers.
So perhaps not everyone was having midnight parties or intimate encounters. It's a good point. History isn't always clear-cut.
Definitely. But still, all those references to two distinct sleeps,
Hmm.
they're hard to just dismiss.
True. So if this two-sleep pattern was so common, what happened? When did we switch to this one block through the night thing?
Well, both the BBC article and the sleep culture piece point to the early 19th century as when things really started to shift.
And the big reason was?
Light. Specifically, Thomas Edison's incandescent light bulb in 1879, and just the general spread of artificial lighting that came with industrialization.
Ah, the light bulb. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Suddenly, night wasn't so final.
Exactly. The BBC notes how artificial light basically stretched the usable day. You could work later, socialize later. Things that were difficult or impossible in the dark became easy.
Right. More factory work, evening entertainment.
Precisely. But here's the catch. While people started staying up later, wake-up times didn't really change that much. You still had to get up for work, for farm chores, whatever.
So sleep got squeezed.
It got squeezed into one single, hopefully deeper, block. Our monophasic sleep. And that's where the modern push for 7 to 9 continuous hours comes from.
Wow. So our normal sleep is basically a fairly recent invention driven by technology. That's kind of nuts.
It really is.
Have any traces of that older biphasic pattern survived into modern times?
It's interesting, yeah. Both the BBC and Sleep Culture mention the siesta.
The afternoon nap.
Right. That midday nap, especially common in warmer climates, could actually be a kind of remnant. Maybe not directly from the middle of the night waking, but part of a more flexible, segmented approach to rest that we lost.
Huh. I never thought of my desire for an afternoon nap as historical. Makes you feel slightly less lazy about it.
Maybe. And think about people who regularly wake up in the middle of the night now.
Yeah, that 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling moment.
Well, the BBC mentions a sleep experiment from 1992 by Thomas Ware. He had people live with 14 hours of darkness each day for a month.
Like replicating pre-industrial conditions.
Kind of. And guess what happened? By the fourth week, their sleep naturally shifted. They still slept about 8 hours total, but it split into two distinct chunks with a wakeful period in between.
Whoa, so our bodies might actually default to that pattern if we take away the constant light.
It certainly suggests a natural tendency towards it, so maybe waking up at 3 a.m. isn't an abnormality, but an echo of how humans used to sleep.
That's a perspective changer. And sleep culture mentioned research in Madagascar, too.
Yes, David Sampson's work. The BBC mentions it as well. He studied communities in Madagascar with very limited or no artificial light.
Yeah.
They showed a similar pattern, a distinct period of activity after midnight, followed by more sleep until dawn. Another modern example suggesting biphasic sleep isn't just some weird historical footnote.
It really makes you question what normal sleep even means. Okay, sleep culture also brought up some different cultural attitudes towards sleep, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Attitudes have been all over the place. Ancient civilizations sometimes viewed sleep with fear, saw it as related to death. In ancient Egypt, though, it was sometimes seen more positively, almost worshipped.
Interesting. And then things shifted again.
Right. As societies became more focused on productivity, sleep started being seen by some as, well, a waste of time, a time sucker.
Like Leonardo da Vinci trying polyphasic sleep, short naps instead of one long sleep.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And Edison himself famously thought people slept too much. He was a big promoter of less sleep, more work. Thanks, Tom.
Huh. And what about that Japanese practice, inamuri?
Right. Sleep culture mentions that. Napping in public, like at your desk or on a train. It's often seen not as laziness, but as a sign you're working so hard you're exhausted. Total cultural difference in perception there.
That's fascinating. Culture really shapes how we view even basic biological functions.
Absolutely. And here's another thing from sleep culture, drawing on Eckhart's work again. Bed sharing. It was incredibly common until maybe the 17th century. Not just families, but strangers, sharing beds at inns. Mostly because beds were seriously expensive.
How expensive?
Eckhart apparently estimated a good bed could be worth like a quarter of a typical household's entire possessions.
Wow. Okay, that explains piling in together.
Totally. Sleep culture even mentions famous figures like Samuel Pepys, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, all writing about sharing beds with others at various times.
Talk about cozy. Or maybe awkward. It's easy to forget just how different daily life, even sleep arrangements, used to be.
It really is.
Now, we also had that source about the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't directly about sleep patterns, but nightlife. How does that fit in?
Well, the interview with Avner Wishnitzer about life after dark in the Ottoman Empire, it reinforces the idea that before widespread artificial light became a thing, people's activities naturally extended into the night hours.
So the night wasn't just for sleeping.
Right. While it doesn't give us specifics on Ottoman sleep schedules, it implies that, much like in pre-industrial Europe, the lack of bright, easy light would have shaped their daily and nightly rhythms.
So it's likely their sleep wasn't the solid block we aim for today either?
It's very probable
Yeah.
their nights would have had a different structure, a different flow. It aligns with that broader historical picture of sleep being more segmented, or at least differently organized, before electricity changed everything.
So it seems darkness, or the lack of artificial light, was the really big player shaping sleep across different cultures and times.
It really looks that way.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest one is that sleeping in two distinct chunks, that biphasic sleep seems to have been pretty common, maybe even the norm, for centuries across many parts of the world.
Right, our solid 8 hours is actually the newcomer on the block.
Definitely. And the big game changer was artificial light, especially from the 19th century onwards. That really pushed us towards the single, consolidated block of sleep we now think of as normal.
And we also saw that attitudes towards sleep and even practices like bed sharing have varied massively across cultures and time periods. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, historically speaking.
Absolutely. Sleeping right through the night is a relatively modern phenomena.
And what's really interesting, maybe for you, the learner, is thinking about how this history might change how you see your own sleep.
Yeah, that middle-of-the-night wakefulness, the kind that feels like insomnia or something being wrong.
It might actually just be historical, an echo of an older pattern.
It could be. Perhaps not something to fight against so much as understand, maybe even utilize, if it happens.
That is a thought. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the trade-offs. We gained convenience and maybe safety with our modern sleep, but did we lose something?
Like that quiet, reflective time in the middle of the night. Or maybe even different kinds of dream experiences that came with that segmented sleep. It's fascinating to consider.
Definitely something to mull over.
For sure. And if you're curious to explore this more, Roger Eckert's work is definitely the place to start. Or even just researching daily life in pre-industrial times can give you a much richer sense of how people lived and slept.
There's a whole hidden history of the night out there.
There really is.